Hello, and welcome back to the Pragmatic Alchemy podcast. I am your host, Courtney, and we are joined today by a very special guest who I will introduce in just a second. We're going to be talking today about a whole bunch of things, I suspect, but hopefully the core thread that goes through this episode is living with intention, or intentional living, how to really just get a better understanding of yourself and where you hope to be, and then figuring out how to get there. Because I think for a lot of us, we just sort of end up in situations. I know from my personal history, there were a lot of situations I just kind of ended up in, and there wasn't a lot of intention behind them. But when I started to take these steps to really think about what I wanted my life to look like, everything seemed to get a lot better. So I have brought in somebody that I think to be an absolute expert on the idea of intentional living. You may be familiar, local folks may be familiar with the work of Merritt Minnemeyer. Also, can I just say, best name in the business? Absolutely love it.
I can't take credit for that, but
well, but you did good. You did good to keep it, not change it, not mess with it, because it's perfection. Merritt is a professional coach, a certified professional coach, and the founder of Master of One Coaching. I'm going to let her talk more about all of the hyphenates that are attached to her professional identity, with the exception of, I am going to mention, I realized only briefly before you sent your bio that you are, and that you have an IMDb page. So I noticed in your bio it says recovering actor, and I don't even remember what I had Googled. I think I was just looking like for your web address or something. And and so I put in Merritt Minnemeyer, and it comes up IMDb, and I was like, "There's literally only got to be one Merritt Minnemeyer in the whole wide world. Like, I can't imagine that there's more people with such a badass name." And then you sent the bio, and it said recovering actor, and I was like, oh, "Okay, so that really was her IMDb. So you have an IMDb,
I
awesome,
do. I mean,
fantastic."
it's pretty brief, but yeah, I do have one.
I love it. So Merritt, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you for having me. It's really my pleasure, and I'm so excited for you and your new adventures. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
including me. Well, gosh, yes. So, where to start? I think in terms of intentional living, I too can totally relate to ending up places
Mhm.
and acting among them. I grew up as a performer. I started, dance class and music and what have you, and gymnastics at the age of 3, and found that I was most successful socially and got the most validation from performing. And so I identified, became that became part of my identity is
Mhm.
as being a performer. And because of that, that's all I did. It's all I told myself that that was my value. And so
Mm.
that coupled with some, unfortunate negative experiences in other areas like sports, I really leaned hard and heavily into performing. And that was the totality of my extracurricular experience and my school experience. I really embraced that as my identity. So there's a couple of pitfalls with
Mhm.
that. One is, when I was applying to college and it was expected, I expected that I would go to school for acting, which I did. Most people, when they go into art school, I heard a lot of, "Oh, you're so lucky to know exactly what you want to do," or "Aren't you so fortunate that your parents support you in pursuing your dreams?" And all of that is true. And I did not it was really less about me having focus and more about feeling like I didn't have anything that was worth doing or giving.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
And so on the outside, it looked like I was following a passion and a dream. Truly, it felt like a trap to me, and
Mhm.
one that I did not know how to escape. And so I very much ended up, because of some lifelong agreements and decisions that I had made up to that point from the time I was very small. I ended up in a place that was very confusing for me because it felt like I should be really happy. It felt like I
Mhm.
should be. This is what I've always wanted, right? I should be in. Why is my anxiety so high? Why am I dealing with suicidal ideation on occasion?
Mhm.
Why is it so high stress when this is who I am and who I'm supposed to be?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I found that that dichotomy, that conflict within me was incredibly difficult to navigate, and it was so confusing. And so I did not have a sense of intentionality, well, is that true? The intention was to continue being who I was being. That was the intention, and I did have
Right.
clarity around that.
Mhm. Mhm.
I did have clarity around that.
Mhm.
What I didn't have in clarity around or didn't understand was that there were other options and that I could switch my intention.
Mhm.
Right. So I guess in a way, I learned the power of intention very early, and that I made a decision. I set a goal. I set a plan. I had extremely high standards for myself. I met or exceeded those high standards from the outside,
Shocking.
but but from the inside,
Mhm.
it was it was fraught with crap.
Right. Well, and it's
So,
interesting because what you just described hijacks one of the questions that I was going to bring up later, which is the intersection between identity and intention.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
I think they're so linked and we don't always think to link them, right? So your intentions were based on an identity that had, it sounds like, been thrust upon you in a lot of ways at a time when you didn't maybe have sort of the insight, the wisdom, the maturity to be able to differentiate, to be like, well, no, this isn't really me. This is part of me, but this isn't the meest me.
yeah.
So,
Well, and I think there's a tendency to it was thrust upon me, and also I want to take responsibility for that, because
yeah.
I mean, even as a child, we don't necessarily have the discernment, right, or sort of maturity or the awareness
Hmm. Hmm.
there. And also, I know many young people now who have plenty of that. So I want to say too that I want to take responsibility retroactively.
Hmm.
At the time, I think I was thought of myself as a victim of it, and I certainly, as an adult, have thought of myself as a victim of it. And I want to also like round that out by saying other people have plenty of consciousness around what they want to do, and owning that and standing up for it. And to be fair, I got validated around that identity and
Hmm.
those activities, um, because I kept seeking them out. Right, so it became sort of a self fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And for all the reasons around trauma, whatever else, generational stuff, like it's all in play. And at the end of the day, intention and identity are about what we decide.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
And what we choose. And so yes, there's such an important, I think it's probably the most important intersection, what we're
Mhm.
talking about intention as it relates to identity, because we can create and do and achieve and accomplish and perform along any intention.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that it's fulfilling or in alignment with who we are, with our
Right.
soul, with our purpose, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, also then, if we go a little more meta around that, then we can learn from all of it. So actually, I was talking to one of my coaches last night. It was a group that I'm a part of, and we were talking about the agreements that we make, right? So we have an agreement around what we learn from, and
Mhm.
we're talking about soul agreements right now. So I have made a conscious or unconscious agreement around I'm going to learn from, and from my case, I would say, and being totally transparent around my depression or
Mhm.
my anxiety. I'm going to continue to learn from this. And I realized, like, oh, I've made that agreement.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I'm working it now. I'm like, I'm going to release that agreement because I'm done learning from that. So
You're like, "Lesson received,
yes, thank
thanks.
you. Got it.
Let's yeah,
Moving
let's
on.
move
Yeah.
on." Yeah, I get that. I get that. That's awesome. So one of the things that I had been thinking about in preparation for this, conversation was, our experiences, and we've kind of talked about this very briefly in different social interactions, but our experiences of rebuilding lives, right? And
Mhm.
our circumstances were different in that you lost your husband, and I, ended up divorced, and I do recognize just the significant and very important differences in that. But I do think there's a common experience then of just waking up at some point in your adult life and saying, well, shit,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
who am I? Who am I now? Who am I supposed to be now? And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that part of your journey and how maybe that has led to here.
Yeah, sure. Well, and my husband teases me sometimes. He's like, "Oh gosh, you're gonna have another epiphany," because like I feel like I'm in the business of epiphanies. And that's part of me being of the highest service to the people I work with and for and collaborate with, is that I need to continue, right, as practitioners, we need to continue to be seeking of ourselves, make sure we're
Mm-hmm.
showing up as full as we can. And also, I do have a bit of an addiction to epiphanies. To be perfectly frank about it.
They are wonderful. I love
Yeah,
them too.
and and I have since I was young. I actually
Hmm.
remember, like, as an adolescent, thinking, "Isn't growing up wonderful? Because you just realize so much more every single day." And I'm like, "What a geek I am around this
Yeah.
age!"
Well,
But
we'll
it's
be
true.
geeks together because I feel the
Yeah,
same exact way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, so, and now I've lost sight of your question. Oh, awaken! I remember. So, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
coming to an awakening, right?
Yeah.
And how that, yeah. So this is how I talk about that moment.
Hmm.
My first husband, he and I, so he was also an actor, and we came together through that. And so that's one of the gifts I received. And he was, a tremendous, incredible gift, so many ways. It still is to me,
Hmm.
even through all the stuff that we went through, and that, obviously he went through. So that awakening around that, I talk about it this way: like, there is the moment, or any moment, in which we, as walking around in our human form, are confronted with, or the veil is actually, lifted around mortality and
Hmm.
the finality of our human experience.
Hmm.
We are faced with a choice. So many of us want to walk around pretending that that doesn't actually happen, right? That we don't actually have, there's no end to this life. We just kind of walk around in this sort of haze around, oh well, I'm immortal, or I'm just not going to even deal with it, right?
Correct.
American culture is very good at denying death,
Yes. Yes.
right? Like,
Yes. Yep.
and then, and the idea around, oh, that's not fair. It shouldn't have happened to you. Well, like,
Hmm.
I really, because it happens to everybody.
It
So,
sure does.
so, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I never quite understood that. Although, to be, of course, I thought it was unfair in some moments too.
Hmm.
Uh, but truly, it's going to happen to everybody. So, and we don't get it. We don't get a lot of choice in that. Very few of us get a choice in that. So the awareness that comes with facing, going straight toe to toe with mortality,
Hmm.
and the way I see it, the way I experience it, is kind of, you're standing at the edge of the abyss, right, of the
Hmm.
infinite, and you're looking over the edge and going, huh, okay, I could step over that edge anytime, any way, any day, any moment. I could either intentionally or not intentionally step over that edge,
Hmm.
or I can step back. And once we have that experience of being very honest about our mortality, and very clear about it, about the reality of that, the reality of our experience as humans, it never goes away.
Right. You don't unknow that you're going to die one day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so it's interesting, and this is not about judgment, or being authority or anything, but I will say, what I noticed during, the pandemic lockdown and all the hysteria that surrounded that, um, and the concern, and that's not a judgment. Hysteria is a human state, right? So, like, but some people got super panicky, some people got super grounded, some people got super focused, some people freaked out, some people had all of those experiences, and went up and down.
Hmm.
What I noticed about myself and my husband now, who has had his own moment of looking over the edge of the abyss, several moments, and the people who did not find moments of tranquility and peace during the lockdown and during the whole pandemic thing, was often, not always, but often, people who had not yet had that moment.
Hmm.
People who had not yet had the experience of going, oh, there's my mortality. Oh, there's my experience with death. Oh, there's my
Hmm.
experience with the worst case scenario,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Um, it was their first time going toe
Right.
to toe with that.
Hmm.
And, or the first time being having to really deal with it.
Right.
um,
With the honesty and truth behind it.
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it was interesting to me that to see how the people who had had that experience before, they just dealt with it differently
Mhm.
than the people who are dealing with the first time.
Mhm.
And of course, not across the board. There's always exceptions to this, but that was my overall kind of observation was the people who had gone through an awakening around that were like a little more grounded
Mhm. Mhm.
in their experience of that than the people who had yet to have that experience, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
and I think so. Just bringing that back around to that awakening, we make a decision, make an agreement around. Okay, I'm going to start really owning the fact that I have a say in what happens in my life and
Mhm.
what I do,
Mhm. Mhm.
or I'm going to just keep going through life as if it's happening to me,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And in my line of work, the framework, one of the frameworks that I work in called energy leadership, we would call that victim energy. Now that's a small V, victim. It's not that you are a victim all the time, or you're
Right.
going around as a victim, but it's the experience of it happening to me rather than me happening.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in my perspective, we talk, internal, external locus of control. And then
Right.
also
Right.
just one of the terms I use a lot is problem saturated narrative,
Mm.
where it's
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
everything about the story that you're telling about this experience is drenched in the problems and the
Right.
challenges and not really focusing on any other aspect of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think
Hmm.
that, when we talk about intention, and awakening, that is so, and that's what, in a word is consciousness, right? The
Hmm.
consciousness
Hmm.
of having, I am awake and alive and I have a say. I make decisions around what I do, who I am, how I show up, how I interact. And that's the only thing I have control over is me,
Hmm.
right? I don't have control over how somebody acts
Yeah.
around me. I don't have any control over how they react to me.
Hmm. Hmm.
All I have control over is how I show up and how I respond to the world
Hmm.
around me.
Hmm. Yeah. Yep. I love that. I love that. And so one of the questions that I get a lot with clients that I work with, and I wonder if you do too, is this idea of people just not even knowing who they are.
Yeah.
Just saying, I've never been my own person. I don't even know who that person is. How do you
Mhm.
guide folks to starting to learn who they are?
Well, it's a little bit different with every individual because it depends on what their frame of reference is and how they
Hmm.
identify in terms of. So it's interesting, actually. I love that this is a great question because it's something I'm playing a lot with right now.
Hmm.
The energy leadership framework that I mentioned before is part of what they talk about is a sense of spiritual and I used to glass over that. I used to be like, oh, we don't, let's talk about that because I didn't want to touch it. I wasn't really sure where I stood in it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I've kind of gotten into that idea. So, and so some people have a sense of themselves, identity around spirituality as in religion.
Hmm.
Some people have a different approach. Right? Some people
There
build.
will be an upcoming episode or two on that exact topic.
Excellent.
So we'll put a pin in that. I've got a
Yeah,
couple
yeah.
people lined up. They're going to talk about that exact thing.
Cool, cool, cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people think of it, are very they lean heavily on intellect and they want to say, I'm firmly planted on the ground. I don't want to touch that other
Mhm.
aspect. I don't want to have a conversation, whether it's because who knows why. I mean, there's so many reasons why that might be the case. And some people are curious about finding new ways to identify with spirituality, and so it's a little bit different for everybody. And the reason I bring up spirituality in terms of identity or who they are is because essentially what we do is looking into their sense of inner wisdom, right? What
Mhm.
they have, their inner resources, what they already have within them, what they already know without even knowing how they know, right? So being intuitively guided. And some people hear that and go, oh, that's too woo woo for me. And some people go, oh, really? Tell me more about that. So I have to kind of frame it differently with different people.
Yes, yes. I find the
um,
same. Talking about the same things using different words.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
But ultimately, though, usually I would say actually 100% of the time, we find some in to
Mhm.
trusting. How do you trust your gut? How do you know what's true for you? What
Mhm.
does that feel like in your body? What is the evidence around you or within your own itself. We can start with the body. That's often like grounded and playing grounded for people.
Mm-hmm.
Even if people have never really even been in touch with how they feel within their body, which is so often the case,
Mm-hmm.
we can start to say, okay, where do you feel that emotional experience, right? So I'm sure you do this work too.
Mm-hmm.
And
Both with people and with myself.
yes, yes,
This is what I
absolutely.
work on with my therapist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that's a great place to start is
Mm-hmm.
how do you know who you are? Well, you have to ask yourself who you
Mm-hmm.
are.
Right,
and
right.
then, pay attention to the information that you get physically and emotionally,
Right.
and then intuitively,
Mm-hmm.
we'll lean into that if people are open to it, and if they're not initially, they become that way as they start to trust themselves more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes that staunch, I'm going to say so grounded in quote reality end quote what I see, the evidence I see, because I don't trust myself to know beyond what I see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there's a lot of reasons for that, and I certainly can relate to that. Again, no judgment there.
Right, right. Yeah, I
So,
agree.
and I'm all about science too. So I'm not going to say that, that I want to encompass all of the information is good information, right?
Right, right, right.
So, and how do I discern and dismiss what information is useful and what
Mm-hmm.
information is true for me? Uh, and then we kind of that's how we can then kind of work from there, right? What is
Mm-hmm.
true for you? And do we want that to be true?
Mm.
Right. So what agreements, what decisions have I made around what is true for me? Do I want that to be true anymore? Do I want to say that, I'm just really simply, in my business a lot, I work with entrepreneurs. So,
Right.
and the agreement that they've made for themselves is I'm a bad employee or I'm a bad worker. And so
Right.
therefore I have to go work on my own because I don't want to be judged as a bad worker. So that's an element of
That's so
freedom.
interesting because I had the
Yeah.
exact opposite.
Oh, so interesting, right?
I was like, I'm kicking ass and I'm just going to go kick ass on my own.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So
That's so weird. I've also
so
never admitted that out loud before, just so you know.
I love
But I
that. I
felt like I
love
had
that.
something, I felt like I had something to offer, and I felt like the best way for me to offer it was to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
So
so
yeah,
good, so good.
yeah.
So, and I think that not everybody's going to say that out loud. I feel like I'm a
Right.
bad employee, so I'm going to go to do something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but sometimes there's a backbeat of it, which often comes up. It sounds very cliche or trite, but imposter syndrome, it is
For
very
sure.
much a thing,
Hmm.
especially for entrepreneurs. So then we have to look at that agreement. Am I really a bad worker? Am I really bad at being at working or doing a job, or is it just that I'm having a different way of looking at the world, and maybe
Right.
my agreement with the person who was telling me what I should do is one that doesn't work for me. It's not aligned with me. So I need to go make a new agreement with myself or with other people I want to work with,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So that what was true, I'm a bad worker, now becomes actually I'm a great leader.
Right.
I just was in the wrong. I wasn't aligned. I was in the environment that wasn't aligned with who I am.
Correct. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's how we sort of use that external evidence as a sounding board to change our decisions about who we are.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, what agreements? Well, I'm going to put you on the spot, and you can
Yes.
choose not to answer. But what agreements have you made with yourself currently? Like, what are the things that are top of mind or most pressing?
Yeah. Just because I'm an epiphany addict, so I'm happy to share this. So, quite vulnerably, I will share that around the spirituality topic, that this has been something that has been fraught for me with. I have a lot of shame
Mm.
around spiritual identity,
Mhm.
and also a tremendous amount of curiosity. And over the last year, I have been embarking on a new path, or is it new? It's not really new. I'll say it's an extension of an old path
Mhm.
that has feels very. Uh, talk about woo woo. I have really gone in deep into the rabbit hole of woo woo in a very specific way. And it's not something that I'm going to share with every client in terms of the
Mhm.
nuances of it or the details of it.
Mhm.
However, this aspect of my life and my exploration of myself has been so deep and meaningful and rich and fulfilling
Mhm.
that it can't help but spill out into my work with my kids and my work, with my husband. And
Mhm.
when I say work, I mean like how I show up, right? Which is always
Right,
for
right,
me.
right. Yep.
It's work that I'm all constantly engaged in.
Can I
Um,
just make a note that I noticed that?
Did you?
Yeah. Like,
Tell me.
so
Tell me what you noticed.
yeah. So for listeners that don't know, Merritt and I first interacted maybe 4 years ago or
Yeah,
so,
4 or 5.
when
Yeah.
we were both associated with one Epic Place, and at that time, I probably would have thought, well, I do woo kind of coaching, and Merritt does corporate coaching, like very kind of buttoned up, a little bit more of that. Formal's not quite the right word. And I don't want to say professional because I don't mean to imply that I'm not, or that coaches that are woo are not professional, but it was just a little
Yeah.
bit more buttoned up corporate from my
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I, over probably about this last year, definitely the last few months, I've just different things that you've incorporated into your social media, the little crystal ball gift. Like, I'm just like, Merritt's got woo. It's coming out. I see it. And so, yeah, so it's interesting to hear you say that that's something that you've been working on, because for whatever that's worth to you, it's evident, even, and I'm not a coaching client. So it's not like this is something that we're working on from my perspective and I'm seeing it,
Right.
through that lens. This is just something I've observed over the last
So
few months. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and that's a great connection to the question about intentionality and identity, because it's a part of my identity that I have shoved that way deep down
Hmm.
and had so much shame around.
Is it because of
And
that corporate tilt to your work, do you think? Like, does that feed into it?
so no, well, because the corporate thing is it's so interesting because that's actually relatively new.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay.
Um, and I went, so I
I
started
don't
when
even
I
know if
so
that's the right word. And if it's,
well, no, I
I
think it
just,
is.
yeah.
And the reason, so just to give a little backstory on this, if this is as context, I came up right in the performing world, in the arts world, graduated from school when I was 20 years old, had a deep desire to do meaningful work, had only the context of theater. So I
Hmm.
tried to figure that out, and it sent me first into nonprofit arts education, and then eventually to arts education administration, and then to sort of a more traditional education. And I've been slowly inching my way into more administrative or executive
Yes.
roles.
Executive
Okay.
is the perfect
Yeah.
word. Yes. Which you use. And I just forgot it for a second.
No, no, that's right. No.
Yeah.
So, and so I, and kind of, and I think it's a way of maybe trying to separate myself in a way from being,
Mm,
um, that identity of like the starving artist or the
right.
artist that is a hot mess, right? So
Okay.
much of
And the
the
shame that
identity
you
around
mentioned. Yeah.
yes, and so much around being, at least when I was coming up and being, and I'm going to speak specifically to my experience, the time too. I think that I'll say it this way. I tell the story a couple of times when I've done keynotes and stuff. Is when I was 19 and I was in school, and I was in a play where I was in a gay couple of performing this on stage. So I was 19 years old, and we had a. It's like even hard for me to talk about. You can tell that like I get a little tripped up, but it's important to talk about because it's really what was another one of those defining moments.
Mm,
So there was an adult who was the director. He was a professor, and there was a fellow student who was playing my partner in the
hmm.
role, and it wasn't a very important role. It was sort of on the periphery, and we had a invited dress rehearsal. So there were people in the audience. It was kind of like our first time. It wasn't a huge audience, but it was a few people who we didn't know. And I was having a hard time with the role, just feeling vulnerable, feeling safe.
Hmm.
And when I was on stage, the person who was playing my partner took it upon herself to make out with me on stage without
Mm,
my permission.
hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And I mean, and I was sort of thrown, right? And there was an audience there. So I felt like I
Right.
was trapped. I couldn't do anything about it.
Right. Right.
And I
Right.
came off stage and I said something to the effect of, "Don't ever do that again."
Hmm. Hmm.
And she said, "Well, the director told me to do it."
Oh. Hmm.
Um, and I said, "I don't care." Something to the effect of, "I don't care. Don't ever do that again." And she said, "You're just not willing to suffer for your art." And I said, "You are right." I am not.
Correct. Yeah.
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 So that was a very clear defining moment for me around this, like, suffer for your art, right?
Yeah.
Starving artist, be a mess, have no boundaries, share everything with everybody.
Right. Allow yourself to
Um,
be exploited.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the expense
Yeah.
of your own self
Correct.
safety, right?
Yeah.
Later, I would learn the term self abandonment, which
Yep.
was, right, encouraged over
Yeah.
and over again in that
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah.
And here we go, by a white older male
Mhm.
who's in a power position, right? And that was, so I just, like, I kind of shut down around the good parts of being a creative, around the
Mhm.
parts that were feeding me and my feeding my soul. I shut
Mhm.
that all down. I put it all in one undesirable box and went,
Mhm.
screw it all. I'm
Yep.
just throwing it all away. But
Right.
I didn't
Right.
have another sense of who I was, because I was, quote, bad worker. I was bad at business. I was bad at math. I was right. I had all these, like, agreements about the things how I work. And
Right.
so I
Right.
had to inch my way into this other place. Now, having said all that, and also, by the way, I come from an entrepreneurial family. So I had
Okay.
a family that my grandfather built an international publicly traded company from pretty much from the ground up. My mother and father ran a design and build firm on Main Street in our small town. So I had all this different business experience.
Mhm.
And I'd also shut that down because I was, and I'm going to say, the self-defined black sheep of the family. There was no one in the family went, "You're the black sheep," but that was how I saw
Right. Right.
myself.
Right. Yep. Yep.
And so I was bad at that too. I was bad
Mhm.
at being part
Mhm.
of the family. I was, right. So cut to years later, when I'm finally discover what coaching is, and I fell in love with coaching, and I go, okay, I have the arts background, I have the education, I have a master's in education, I have nonprofit experience of the wazoo, which is business in a different form. What am I missing?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I leaned into that executive coaching piece because I thought it was like, oh, it was going to round me out, and
Gotcha.
I was so excited about it because, like, oh, this feels like I can have sort of the best of all worlds, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And so what you identified is so interesting to me because I never thought of myself as buttoned up enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Me neither.
so the fact that you, like, and again, I say this not for my own benefit or only for my own benefit, but for the
Right.
people who are out there listening, going, how we show up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
My intention around my identity was, I want to be more buttoned up. I want to be more executive. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
that was something that you picked up on. You're like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yep.
as a differentiator, not as a judgment, but as a differentiator.
Yeah. Yep.
And here I am going, this is the piece of myself that's going, oh, I'm going to, like, take that other part and, like, shove it away.
Correct.
So,
Right.
so now, to answer your question, now I'm working on bringing those all together to play together.
Yes.
How do we
Yes.
all live in integrity with all those pieces, integrity with each other,
Right.
and allow for that fun, energy, magic piece of it that has always been a part of me that I, pushed aside, for the creativity that I pushed aside because it was bad or was
Right.
unsafe. It was unsafe. To allow for the business acumen part of me, which has been super fun for me to explore,
Mhm. Mhm.
and allow for all of that to be true.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Um,
And just not to hijack your conversation with an
no, no, no.
anti-capitalistic rant, but if we did invite more woo into our corporate and executive structures, I think the whole world would kind of benefit anyway. So
Which is
you're
exactly,
doing like the good
yeah,
work right now.
right. And I think to make it safe for other people to do the same,
Right, right,
right? To
right.
say, let's lean into. I mean, we certainly have in this country a very stringent definition of what religion and spirituality is okay at work and what isn't.
Yep, yep.
The whole argument about, we were founded by a certain religion,
Mhm,
and so
mhm,
those are our principles, which in fact is true and also not true.
mhm, mhm.
So
Correct.
how do we allow for, um, other people to be whole,
Mhm.
and for it to be okay, and for all of us to get along around that,
Yeah,
and use what we know to be true for us, in
right.
conjunction with, in partnership with, in collaboration with other people who have a slightly different understanding of what's true for them,
Mhm.
but it's also true. So, like,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
leaning into, I'm sitting here, I have my little ray of light candle lit every time I talk to somebody, just so
Okay.
that I remember to keep the energy, forward, keep that forward
Right,
in all my
right.
conversations.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. Yeah, you're doing the good work. I
Oh,
think
thanks. So
we
are you.
just thank you. I feel like we forget, there's a quote by Mother Teresa that's, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, if we're suffering, it's because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. And then
Hmm.
Ram Dass, coming from a completely different perspective, says we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah, I have a
And I,
hoodie that says that.
yes. And I just feel like, I'm like,
Uh,
we have truly forgotten that. And I think, to me, when I hear woo, I think about getting back in touch with the knowing of our
mhm.
interconnectedness, the fact that we are just walking each other home, even if we're running high profile, profitable organizations, teams, and companies. Like, those things don't have to be separate, but we have
Yes.
separated them.
And that is my guiding principle of the work that I'm doing right now. Because actually, when we put good money in the hands of good people
Yeah.
and more good people, great work happens, right?
Yeah. Everything good comes from that.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Which is what is so exciting about this, the movement of social entrepreneurship, which is just that's something I'm super passionate about, is
Hmm.
that social
Hmm.
entrepreneurship. And so all of you out there who are wondering about how to, how to be whole in your work, in your life, and you just find the thing that lights you up, the problem that lights you up that you want to solve, and
Yes.
see if you can, as Dr. Wayne Dyer said, follow your bliss. I'm sure that was other people too, but I know
Yeah. Yeah.
I learned that from him. It's it's absolutely true that if you can find, and it's true. I mean, obviously you're doing that too, Courtney.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, you just said it actually very well. Oh, I'm doing a great job at this. I need to go do more of it, right? I need
Yes.
to do it
Yeah.
on my own. I mean, that's exactly it. It's like I need to go make money, serve my family, serve myself, serve my community in ways that are I'm passionate about, and I can do that, and also bring resources into my life, and the resources of the people, the lives of those around me, so
Hmm.
that you can not only support yourself, support your family, but you can also take that money and say, hey, I'm going to put it into a cause that really
Hmm.
makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense to me. I'm going to
Hmm.
spend my money with local organizations that I really feel great about. I'm going to write. That is incredible. That's the best version of capitalism.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So one of the things that I always try to end with, because we are the Pragmatic Alchemy podcast, is, what are some tangible, immediate, accessible things that folks might be able to start doing? You talked a lot about getting to know yourself better by listening to your own deep wisdom in your body, but are there other things that you recommend, that you do yourself, or that you share with your clients about, creating more intention in your life, actual
Hmm.
things that people could do, that they could start with today as soon as they listen to this?
So it seems kind of silly, but I started when I restarted this process, and I've restarted a few times of finding new ways to connect with my intuition and finding out who I am. It's going to a restaurant and finding the thing that makes you happy on the menu.
Food is my love language. I love
Yeah,
this
so not
assignment already.
yeah, so not the thing that you think is the least expensive because you don't want to offend somebody,
Mhm.
or not the thing you think that is the healthiest because you think you shouldn't be eating this or that, the other. I'm not talking about this all the time and being fully indulgent all the time. I'm talking about
Mhm.
as an
Mhm.
exercise. Ask yourself, what would make you really happy to
Mhm.
eat today? Because joy is the ultimate uh, barometer,
Mm. Mhm.
right? When we can connect with our joy, that's how we know that we are in alignment with who we are,
Mhm.
and we're doing the right thing by ourselves, and
Yes.
by extension, those around us.
Okay, we gotta say
Because
that
when
again. When you're in touch with your joy, you know you're on the right track.
Yes, that's
Yes.
right.
Okay. I
And
like
not
that.
just for yourself, for others, because it gives
Mhm.
other people permission to be joyful too. So
Right.
don't when I want to be clear about this. It's not just a selfish exercise to be
Yep.
in touch with connect with your joy. It is, in fact, the most generous thing we can do.
Yeah. And as a mom, I'm gonna say
Oh my gosh,
for
yeah,
sure, because my kids
100%.
get a much better mother when I'm in a good place with my own self.
Yep,
Yes.
much better. Any relationship we have,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Any
yes,
relationship we
yes.
have, and
Yeah.
including, by the way, as those who we lead in our life, right? If staff or students
Mhm,
or
mhm.
anybody we interact with, if we can, whether or not they're conscious of it, they're going to walk away saying, "Wow, I really enjoyed interacting with Courtney because she is so fun to be around.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
that is
Yeah.
that energy that we can give to somebody else, even just by being fully present and fully in alignment
Mhm,
in that
mhm.
moment is so it's an incredible gift that we could give. So what in whatever relationship and whatever role we're playing,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
including the role with ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. And
So
any
yeah,
yeah,
so
any homework assignment that involves food makes me really happy.
I mean, it seems silly, but honestly, I was like, I got to a point, and this is fairly recent. This is like 3 years ago. Where I was like, I don't even know what I want
Right.
when I walk.
Yes.
I'm just going in and going, well, I should get that because I don't want to gain too much weight, or because just as an exercise, what do I actually want here?
Yeah,
Oh, what
yeah.
what I really want is a plate of fries. Now I can't do that
Yes.
every single time, but today I'm going to order a plate of fries because that
That's
makes me
right. That's right, that's right. It's
happy.
funny, just real quick and then we'll wrap up, but, I actually lived that yesterday just at home and not in a restaurant. So this week has been
Yeah,
really
right, right.
challenging and, it's just been, just a kinda hectic and stressful week, and I've had some pulls on my emotions, and my resilience and my nervous system have been tested this week. So we do breakfast for dinner every once in a while for the
Mhm.
kids, and
Mhm.
and my husband makes just banging chocolate chip pancakes, but usually they have the pancakes and then I'll make like an omelet for him and I. And so last night there were a couple extra pancakes and he's like, well, do you want the pancakes or do you want me to make you an omelet? And I was like, you know what? I want those pancakes. I want chocolate chips. I want a ton of butter and I want to just swim it in some syrup. And it
Mhm.
really did just like, it just made everything feel a little bit better, even for
Yeah,
that moment.
yeah.
Like all of the demands on my time and my attention and my energies are still there, but for that moment, I was just in a little syrupy, buttery bliss, and it was very nice. It was very nice, so I
And
finished eating, and I was like, that was exactly what I needed in that moment.
yeah, and it is super important to understand that, like, that's not what we always need, right? It's
Correct.
a,
Right.
it moves us into a place of more receptivity. Of it brings down our resistance to things when we can actually like say, okay, in this moment, I'm going to give myself a little bit of joy so that I can be more open and make better decisions,
That's
right?
right.
Uh, of course, we can't. Well, we could always indulge in that, but that ultimately is it a remedy for finding my groundedness, or am I medicating, right, in some way?
Right. Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's another
I
question.
was
But
going to
when
say
we're
that's
just
a whole other podcast.
that's a whole other podcast. But
Yes.
I want to make that clear. It's like I'm not advocating for like going and like high cholesterol all the time. But what the point of
Right.
this is, and yeah, whether you're doing it at home, I say restaurant because that's my frame of reference because
Yeah.
that what one of my happy places is a restaurant.
I
But
didn't learn that till the pandemic. My favorite hobby is going out to eat. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
for sure. But you could also do going to the grocery store,
Yeah,
right? And like,
yeah,
what's going to
yeah,
make me
yeah.
feel good tonight?
Yes.
And maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's I've been indulging a lot. I've been medicating a lot with sugar and fat. Maybe in order to feel really back to myself, I need to do something that's really good for my body.
Right. Yeah,
That could
yep.
be it true. So the point is to ask yourself, what is it that I really want and need to feel more me?
Mhm,
That's what
mhm.
that's the point. And
Yeah.
then act on that. Honor that answer that you get
Yes.
from your body, from your spirit. And
Yeah.
that is kind of the entryway, whether we are well practiced at this intuitive stuff or not.
Mhm.
It's always a way to back to like, what do I really want? What's a small way I can satiate my joy right now?
Mhm, mhm. Beautiful. Did we miss anything? Was there anything else you had wanted to share that we didn't quite get to today?
Mm, I mean, I feel like I could talk to you for hours. You and I,
I know.
swim in the same pool so
I
much.
think
But
we do. I think we'll come up with more stuff to talk about, I'm sure. Where can the people find you if they would like to learn more about your work or just get to know you a little bit better?
sure, they can find me at masterofonecoaching.com. And that's all one word, and one is spelled out ONE. So masterofonecoaching.com.
Mhm.
And in the we're recording this on September 8th. So in about a month and a half, I'm going to be offering a new program, which is a self paced program for those people who are, wanting high level executive or leadership coaching at a price they can afford, at a pace they can dictate for themselves.
Mhm.
And that's it's a video based course with some live calls, and that's going to happen starting mid October, and that's rolling. So you can come in anytime, and you can find out more information about that at masterofonecoaching.com.
Excellent, and I will put links to that in the show notes so that people can track you down in the places where you are.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun talking to you. And yeah, agree. I could do this for hours and hours and hours if we didn't have other obligations to get to. But I really do appreciate your time and your energy and all of the vulnerability that you brought today and just your willingness to share, your story and yourself with all of us. So thank you.
That's my pleasure. And thank you for doing all of the great work that you do. So if people are just getting to know you, here's one vote very strongly in the corner of yay, Courtney.
You'll make me blush. You'll make me blush. Thank you. It's always nice to hear nice things about yourself from people that you admire. So I appreciate that very much.
Back at you.
Thanks everybody else for being here too. We'll be back next week with another new episode. If you have topic ideas or questions that you would like us to answer on the podcast, please send those to Courtney at shineandsoar.com or complete the contact form on shineandsoar.com/podcast. If you think your people will like this content, please share it with them. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on whatever app you're using to listen today. Thanks so much. I'll see you again soon. Take care of yourselves and each other.